What are the biggest changes to the economy and our society that will follow following Trump's election win? We'll find out with Doug Casey, founder of theinternationalman.com, author of several best-selling books, including Crisis Investing. Welcome back to the show, Doug. Always good to see you.
Likewise, David. I guess I'm reaching you from Buenos Aires, which is one place I do like to be a lot.
I'd like to play for you first this clip of Jamie Dimon at a conference just last week, where he was asked about some of the questions I'll ask you. So let's take a listen.
You had a big sea change that took place in that vote the other day, and some people prepared and some weren't prepared. But I think the most important thing is whoever had been elected, and this is my belief, they are entering and going to be responsible for the most complicated geopolitical, military, and geoeconomic situation that the world has faced since World War II. And of course, I wish them all the best. I think people try to help get through this. It could be a difficult thing with a lot of unknowns and uncertainties, and so policy is going to matter. And of course, who runs the government will be determinative there.
The most complicated geopolitical, geoeconomic, and military situation since World War II. Would you agree or disagree with that assessment, and what is he referring to?
I'd completely agree with him. In fact, I think he's understating the situation. More than complicated, I would likely have said dangerous. Or critical. There are all kinds of things that are coming together at this point. And the election of Trump, which was, in my opinion, a very good thing. Well, let me put it this way. The failure of the Democrats and Kamala, Spanish pronunciation of her name, it means how bad, actually, is much more important than the election of Trump. But I have high hopes for Trump himself because he is angry at this point, at the state, the deep state, I should say, in particular, and he's going to do his best to unwind it and abolish it. And so I'm cautiously optimistic, even though before Biden leaves office, he may yet start World War III with Russia, or may attack Iran, or provoke the Chinese. Yeah, it's a dangerous time. Not to mention that the markets are all very overpriced and the deficits are going to get bigger. Yeah, it's a dog's breakfast.
Can we hone in on exactly what is dangerous? Because the markets, as you pointed out, are or have been rallying. They've been euphoric on Trump's victory, and it just doesn't seem to be pricing in some of the dangers we're talking about now.
No, by all conventional metrics, the stock market, which is at all-time highs, of course, is price earnings ratio, price to book value ratio, dividend yields, quite overpriced. And in the meantime, actual numbers of employed people are going down. The amount of debt in the country is gigantic and growing. It seems like more than ever, people are living off their credit cards and doing so at 18 or 20% or whatever it is interest. A lot of auto loans going into default. People are still idiotically paying tens of thousands of dollars to go to college on borrowed money and be indoctrinated with Marxist concepts. So it's kind of an ugly picture. And I've been saying for a long time that what we're entering upon is something I call the Greater Depression. Much of the world, in particular the Western world, in particularly the US and Canada, have been living above their means for a long time. And the way they've done this is by borrowing money. It's like if you or I borrowed $1 million right now, we could live very high off the hog for the next year, but an artificial rise in our standard of living. But it's going to be a very real decrease in our standard of living when we have to pay the $1 million back. That's what all the debt in the world is about.
Let's talk about the actual last Great Depression that happened in the 1930s. There have been several theories as to what caused the Great Depression. One of these theories is that the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that were introduced primarily to protect American farmers first, but then placed restrictions on more than 20,000 imported goods. That made things worse, if not triggered a Great Depression. Trump's tariffs of 2017 did not trigger any sort of Great Depression, at least not immediately. Could this time be any different?
Well, he's talking about tariffs that are much, much greater than anything we've seen in the past. He's talking about across the board tariffs of 10 or 20%. And he's talking about punishing the Chinese with 50 or 60% tariffs. I mean, he's got all these arbitrary numbers. If that happens, well, look, let me go back a little bit further.
Sure.
The major export of the U.S. for the last 40 years hasn't been Boeings or soybeans to start with. Our major export has been dollars. And now there are, who knows, nobody knows, 30 or 40 trillion dollars outside the United States in the hands of foreigners. And unlike Americans who must use, by law, dollars to transact, foreigners don't have to. And I'm afraid the dollar is going to become a hot potato. We're seeing that with the BRICS talking about starting a new currency. If Trump puts on tariffs, trade internationally would collapse because people cannot afford to buy these things. And trade now is a much, much bigger factor in the world economy than it was in 1930 when Smoot-Hawley went into effect. So, yeah, it's a potential catastrophe from that point of view. A lot of good things about what Trump is doing, but that is a very dumb thing. He's got a marginal grip on economics.
Are you liking this video so far? Well, video creation is challenging. So let me tell you about today's sponsor, InVideo, which is changing the game for video creators like me. And if you're a content creator, then listen up. I know that creating videos can be complex, but InVideo AI V3 changes that. With new generative capabilities, you can now create full-length, publish-ready videos from scratch using simple text prompts. Whether you're telling a story, explaining complex topics, or creating product ads, InVideo AI V3 puts you in control, bringing your ideas to life in minutes. Unlike tools like Sora and Runway that only generate clips, InVideo V3 creates entire videos ready for use, and the best part, it's launching in just a few weeks. With the edit command box, you can make real-time adjustments to your videos, plus voice cloning now lets you replicate your voice for narration. If you haven't checked out their current version, scan the QR code here or use the link in the description down below to try it for free. Paid plans start at $20 a month, so use my code to get 2 times video credits in your first month. Get started today. Is there another way that the Trump administration, can go about enacting fairer trade, which I think is the crux of the issue, at least that's what is marketed as being, penalizing China for unfair trade practices, corporate espionage, so on and so forth? But it's not just China, by the way. Even Canada wasn't immune to tariffs on steel and aluminum products. I think Trump wanted to even the playing field on international trade, however reasonable or unreasonable that claim or hope should be. Is there another way to do that besides the use of tariffs?
Yes, absolutely. A very obvious way. The reason why Americans buy things from all around the world is because the costs in America are too high. Why are the costs so high? Because we have an unbelievable morass of regulations that take costs to the moon, make the manufacture of a lot of things completely uneconomic, point number one. Point number two, taxes in the U.S. are very high. And of course, you want to go to a lower tax jurisdiction to manufacturing things. So to solve the problem, you don't make the problem worse by putting on tariffs. You solve the problem by eliminating regulations and cutting taxes. But you can't really cut the taxes unless you cut your spending. So that's another thing that they should be doing. The U.S. government should radically pare back its intervention in the economy and its spending. to make it possible to reduce costs here in the U.S.
What do you think of Trump's tax cuts? Will tax cuts on corporations and even on some individuals help to stimulate the economy?
Absolutely. In fact, one thing that Trump has mentioned is he'd like to eliminate the income tax. That would be absolutely marvelous. The cost and the nuisance and the risks of filing income tax every year, I mean, it's catastrophic. The distortions that it causes in the U.S. economy. Yes, the income tax should be eliminated. People forget we didn't even have an income tax in the U.S. before 1913. So yes, that could be done. The only way you can do it, however, is that the government radically cuts its expenses. Agencies should be abolished wholesale. You know, this program with Elon and Vivek,
Yes.
marvelous idea. But most of these government agencies, they're looking at the Department of Education first and foremost. But they should look at, we've got hundreds of them, and they should look at all of them. And it's not just the Department of Education that should be abolished. Most of these agencies should be abolished. They serve no useful purpose. And if you just cut back the number of employees and make them more efficient, when the Democrats are back in office, and they will be, if you fill the piggy bank, that'll allow them to spend a lot more money and hire back exactly the same people that you fired. It's like a plant. If you prune it, which is what they're planning on doing, it just causes it to grow back stronger and bigger. So no, you've got to root these agencies out, pull them out by the roots, and pour Agent Orange in the ground where they grew.
Okay, I do want to come back to what Vivek said, or what Vivek and Elon plan to do with the Department of Government Efficiency, acronym DOGE. Going back to your point about eliminating income taxes, how will the government finance its operations? I mean, yes, eliminating agencies, cutting costs, fine, but they still need income. Trump had proposed to supplement this with tariffs, but economists said that's not enough.
Well, look, Trump said, and this makes no sense, but he said it. He said, we can't mess with Social Security. That's written in stone. Can't mess with Medicaid, can't mess with Medicare. And of course, they can't do anything about the interest rates, interest payments on the budget, which are now over $1 trillion. And the other thing he said is that we can't mess with the Department of Defense, which is one of the major sources of corruption. Now, these things put together add up to almost 90% of all government spending. Those are the biggest things right there that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to cut them back. So it's actually a hopeless task. But perhaps he can keep this thing going by cutting back regulations and cutting back taxes, by abolishing all these other agencies, which stop progress from being made. I would go further, though. I mean, look, Social Security, it's counterproductive. I know many people rely on it because they've been taught that they can rely on Social Security. But a responsible person saves for his own retirement and doesn't rely on a Ponzi scheme that the government is running, because it is a Ponzi scheme. Social Security's assets are solely government debt. And there's an excellent chance that all government debt will be defaulted on. That's another question. Should it be? Maybe. I think so. Medicare, your expenses are largely covered. If you're over 65, wait a minute. Should we cover the expenses people have on their cars as well? I mean, a prudent person saves for his own retirement with Social Security, saves for his medical expenses, Medicaid. Why should somebody pay for somebody else's medical expenses? Should we pay for somebody else's house expenses? Should we pay for their car expenses? Well, we do all that too, of course, directly or indirectly. So it's and the Department of Defense, so-called, could easily be pared back 50%, 75%. It's basically enriching the military companies as opposed to defending America. Actually, it's acting as a provocation to adversaries like China and Russia around the world, all this military spending. Anyway, didn't mean to give you a lecture on this, but
Well, that does lead to my next point. Take a look at what Vivek Ramaswamy said on the Tucker Carlson show on this issue.
Because if you actually did take one of those agencies and say, hey, you have to show up to work 5 days a week, and actually you have to go to Topeka, Kansas or Cincinnati, Ohio instead, you'd actually have a good number of the people quit anyway, which avoids the severance costs. So I kind of like that method, as you could kind of get 2 in 1 right there, is thinning it down and moving it out. But yeah, move the agencies out. You should fire about 75% of the federal employee headcount. If not, immediately on day one, you could ease into that pretty quickly. Agencies that are redundant can be reorganized that shouldn't exist. Department of Education is a good example. Shut it down, send the money back. Workforce training can move to the Department of Labor, and loan collections can move to Treasury. There's just a mass opportunity for a mega reorganization and thereby downsizing of this bureaucracy. And it's a one-way ratchet, because it's not like if another president comes back, they can write that back into existence by fiat. They'd actually have to go through Congress to do it.
Is there a historical precedent of this kind of downsizing happening in the U.S. government? I mean, how likely are they to actually carry out with this is my broader question.
No, there's not a real historical precedent for it. Of course, after World War I, which was a disaster for the economy and for the world, a lot of agencies were disbanded and spending was cut back. Same after World War II. But people don't realize that before 1913, before the World War I started, the U.S. government only took about in between 5 and 10% of the economy. Now it's closing in on 50% directly and indirectly. So it's grown like a cancer in the U.S. and it needs to be excised. So yes, it's not just a good thing; it's a necessary thing. It become unwieldy, and the U.S. government has become the enemy of the average American. The government has become the enemy of its subjects, and it treats Americans not like citizens but like subjects at this point. So, yes, Vivek is quite correct.
Okay, take a listen to what Trump said on his website here. This is Agenda 47. This pertains to cutting waste, stopping inflation, and crushing the deep state. We'll just listen to the first part.
Crooked Joe Biden, our disgraced president, has wasted trillions of taxpayer dollars in less than 3 years, causing uncontrolled inflation that is crushing working families. Reining in Biden's wasteful and unnecessary spending is vital to stopping inflation and rescuing our economy from ruin. But the pain of the spending cuts must be borne by the special interests in Washington bureaucrats, not by American families and American seniors in particular. For 200 years under our system of government, it was undisputed that the president had the constitutional power to stop unnecessary spending through what is known as impoundment. Very simply, this meant that if Congress provided more funding than was needed to run the government, the president could refuse to waste the extra funds and instead return the money to the general treasury and maybe even lower your taxes, although we did give you the biggest tax reduction in history and the biggest regulation reduction in history, 2 things I'm very proud of. And they still are there, although they're disappearing rapidly under Biden.
What's the response to what he just said?
I really like what Donald says that he's going to do. And I think he's going to do it this time around. But you have to remember, during his first time in office, he spent almost as much as the Biden administration did on all kinds of idiotic things. Don't forget that Donald always called himself the king of debt, a low interest rate guy, thought that as long as the government did things that he thinks is a good idea. Look, I wish him well, and maybe he's on the right track this time, but I'm afraid he won't go far enough. And he shouldn't say things like biggest tax cut in history and the biggest regulation cut in history under his previous watch, because it's not. I mean, It was bigger under Reagan. So he shouldn't be inaccurate in what he says. It's not necessary.
Well, are any of his policies or agendas going to stave off this greater depression that you said we're entering? Basically, would it help?
It'll help, yes, because the first thing is when you've dug yourself into a ditch and you want to get out of it. Step number one is stop digging. So yes, I think he'll try to do that. But there are so many distortions that have been cranked into the economy where people are doing things that are uneconomic in reality, but they're doing them because they're artificially economic because of regulations and tax distortions. Well, electric vehicles is one of many. So people that are working in these artificially supported industries are going to be unemployed. Well, they'll can go out and find a new job, which shouldn't be that hard. Unemployment should not theoretically be a problem because everybody has an infinite desire for goods and services. Everybody does. So there's no theoretical reason for unemployment, except for being sick, perhaps, or something like that. Listen, I hope he pulls it off because right now, Washington and the U.S. government are controlled by actual Jacobins. And when I say that, I'm not kidding. These people have the same psychology, the same philosophy, the same economic and political beliefs as the Jacobins that came after the French Revolution did. So they've got to be rooted out. I hope Trump can do it. But you may remember that when the Reaganites came into office in 1980, their theme song was, "If not us, who? If not now, when?" And it turned out it wasn't them and it wasn't then. Situation is much more serious now than it was under Reagan. So I really hope that Trump can pull this off and it's not just campaign blah, blah.
This is a chart I want to bring your attention to, Doug. This I've shown several times on my show. I'd like to get your reaction to this. This is the distribution of household wealth in the U.S. Since 1989. We can keep going back. The trend has been that the wealthier has been getting wealthier, or the wealthy has been getting wealthier, and the poor's wealth have more or less stagnated in terms of growth. It has grown in nominal terms, but not to the same degree as the top 1% or even the top 0.1%. As you can see that the wealthy's net wealth has increased proportional to how the markets have grown. That makes sense. The wealthy owns financial assets.
The rich have gotten richer, and in relative terms, anyway, the poor have gotten poorer. That's absolutely correct. And it's completely predictable. When the government, when the state captures the economy. Why? Because the trillions of dollars that flow out of Washington and New York, it's the rich guys that get to stand closest to the fire hydrant of money, and they get to drink deeply before whatever's left goes to the plebs. And they're so politically connected that they make sure that they get more of it for that reason, too. So, yeah, it's completely predictable. The bigger the state becomes, which it has, it's become a behemoth, the rich will get richer. And, the poor, get some scraps thrown to them. They get Medicaid and welfare and benefits like that, which is really stupid because it destroys their incentives and cements them to the bottom of society. So, yeah, this is a very accurate chart.
Doug, in theory, if we were to theorize here, let's remove the government completely. We're living in a complete anarchy here. And it's everyone is a self-governing entity. Would this chart still look like this? In other words, will we still have a huge disparity of wealth?
I think you're always going to have a great disparity of wealth. I'm not a Christian, but Jesus said, the poor you shall always have with you. Why? Well, some people are more motivated than others, and some people are smarter than others. Some people are stronger than others. Yeah, so you're always going to have people that are richer than other people. You're going to have people that know how to manage their money better than others. but it won't be a structural element of society, which it is now because of the political situation.
How do you feel about the notion of redistributing the wealth from the people who work harder into the people who perhaps, due to maybe unfortunate circumstances, cannot work harder?
It shouldn't happen, but it's not that society would not solve a problem, whether it's real or perceived. People have forgotten totally that during the 19th century, we had hundreds of what are called beneficial societies. Remnants of it are the Kiwanis and the Lions and Rotary, and there's a few others. But there used to be hundreds of them. And there were many of them, most of them were local. And they made it their business to make sure that people that had had hard luck were helped out. And they were monitored locally so that if the person was skating and didn't deserve it, the benefits were cut off. But now welfare has become enfranchised. That should be abolished and replaced with the types of things that society had in the 19th century, which were all destroyed because of Roosevelt institutionalizing welfare and government intervention.
Okay, well, let's turn back to the markets now. I want to get your reaction to the story. Berkshire Hathaway's cash pile reaches record $325 billion. The cash pile has been growing since the beginning of the year, but people have been speculating as to why. One theory is that, well, he's just preparing for a market crash. Another theory is that, well, maybe perhaps he's retiring and he wants to, prepare for a transition, which would be not a market reaction, but just a Berkshire Hathaway issue. Anyway, what is your reaction to large institutional investors like Berkshire Hathaway stockpiling cash at record S&P 500 levels?
Yeah, well, Buffett, who's fairly candid about this type of thing, has said he'd love to buy some big companies, but he can't because they're all too expensive. And that's why he's selling, I think, and going to cash. So the answer to the question is that, yeah, he thinks that there's nothing he can buy. He's not like making a judge on the market in general. He doesn't like to do that. But so he's building cash. And I don't want to buy. There's almost nothing I want to buy in the market either.
Really? You can't think of any one area that would be undervalued or perhaps has growth potential under Trump?
Well, I said almost, because my specialty, my hobby horse, everybody's got to have a specialty.
Yeah.
I'm a generalist in many ways, but I'm also a specialist. I'm both, actually. And my specialty has always been resource stocks.
Yes.
Mining stocks, gas and oil stocks, uranium stocks, this type of thing. And they are super double cheap right now. Gold has gone up as high as 2,900. But the stocks have not really followed it at all. So relative to gold and I'm talking about all commodities now, but gold in particular, they're at the cheapest level in history. Relative to other stocks, they're at the cheapest level in history. And since 1971, when Nixon devalued the dollar, we've had 5 resource bull markets that where these small gold stocks have all gone 10 to 1 as a group, with some individual stocks going up 10 to 1 and unbelievably 1,000 to 1 just in a few years. I think it could happen again. I think it will happen again. So yeah, I am interested in those stocks and a few others in the major market.
Any particular metal that you favor more than another?
It's not like gold is cheap anymore historically. It's not like it's at giveaway levels anymore from a historical point of view. But I think it's going higher because the BRICS, all of them, which equal more than half of the world's population, don't want to hold dollars for all kinds of reasons we could discuss. So how are they going to trade with each other if they're not going to use dollars? They don't want to hold their rupees and rubles and yuan. I mean, they don't want to hold each other's hot potatoes. They don't trust each other. They don't want to use dollars. So what are they going to use? They're going to go back to gold. And that's why gold is going higher, not because it's a particular bargain right now. That's the main reason gold is going higher.
What's your outlook on energy and energy stocks under Trump? Would policies change to incentivize more drilling for
Yeah,
gas?
yeah, yeah. The world runs on hydrocarbons. It's not going to run on windmills and solar collectors. Nothing wrong with them for isolated, unusual, special circumstances. I'm not opposed to them, but they're totally ridiculous, really stupid to try to use them to power a mass industrial society. And right now, the way to do it, as it has been for the last 100 and some years, is with hydrocarbons. And there's enough hydrocarbons left for several hundred years, believe it or not. But actually, nuclear should replace, we should be generating power with nuclear, which is the safest, the cheapest, and the cleanest form of power generations, not even hydrocarbons.
So you're long-term bullish on uranium?
Very. It's about $80 right now. And I think with fifth generation nuclear plants, which are the size of those used in nuclear submarines, for instance, which are being developed rapidly, there's going to be a big demand for uranium. And of course, in X number of years, maybe 5, maybe 50, fusion power will come on board. Mm. So this hysteria to waste giant amounts of capital on solar and wind is actually an insane mania. Wow. Answer to the question, David, is despite the fact that Trump wants to see a lot more drilling of oil and gas, and you think, well, that's going to reduce the prices of those things. Well, maybe it will, but the use of oil and gas around the world has been increasing at a couple of % per year, and I think that's going to continue.
How do you feel about Bitcoin? Almost at 100,000. We're speaking today on the 20th of November, 94,000, new all-time highs, as you know. Store of value is one of the arguments for Bitcoin, although speculative asset is an argument against it. And Trump wants to implement some sort of Bitcoin strategic reserve, which would be the first of its kind, at least in America. Your sentiment on Bitcoin as a money overall?
I was a late adopter to Bitcoin. I only got into it in 2017. Why? Because Aristotle in the 4th century BC laid down the characteristics of a sound money. Bitcoin is durable, it's divisible, it's convenient, it's consistent, just like gold is. But I couldn't figure out, well, what's the use proposition? That's the fifth reason why gold is money. It's usable. And I thought, well, how is it usable? I mean, it's just a digit. And then I figured it out. It's the perfect transfer mechanism. It's the perfect privacy mechanism. It's easier to store. It's got a lot of advantages over gold from that point of view. And eventually, they'll be mining gold in the asteroids, which some of them have been determined to have gigantic, rich amounts of gold and silver and other heavy metals. So, gold is not going to be totally forever. But I think Bitcoin will be. It's got lots of advantages. I'm a Bitcoin bull. And it's going higher for, I think, a lot of reasons. A lot of governments are going to adopt Bitcoin as a temporary alternative, high-tech alternative, if you will, to gold and certainly to the U.S. dollar, which is on its way to the graveyard. Yeah, I'm a bull on Bitcoin. I don't know how high it can go, but
you don't think the dollar will strengthen under Trump? On that note,
I'm not sure it will, and the reason is that the U.S. government is running a $3 trillion deficit every year, and that money is monetized. Nobody's buying the US government's debt. In fact, foreign governments like the Chinese are selling it. It's a hot potato. So who can the government get to finance their debt? Well, they're mainly selling it to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve prints up money to pay for it. So the money supply is going to keep rising in the US for that reason alone. So I'm not optimistic about the dollar. Sure, there's short-term fluctuations, but it's an IOU nothing on the part of a manifestly bankrupt government. Let's hope Trump can turn that around. But I think the situation's, at this point, too far gone. And the population of the U.S. has become too corrupted by getting freebies from the government. And the corporations are even worse than the general population.
You wrote about these issues in your first crisis investing book, first published in 1979, the dangers of government intervention, too much debt, fiscal irresponsibility, the return of inflation, so on and so forth. And many of the issues are still here with us today. And so if we were to rewrite crisis investing for 2025, would you change anything in terms of advice, recommendations for investors?
Well, we had a really nasty recession in the early 1980s, but we recovered from that. So I wouldn't have been so adamant on the fact that things would come unglued and the economy would be reformed so soon. But so I would change that. But the basic economics and the basic predictions, not at all. The trend that I outlined in that book has stayed in motion and has indeed accelerated over the last 50 years. The amount of inflation, the amount of debt, the amount of regulations, they've all gone up. So, yeah, I think it's an excellent book to even read today.
Well, I encourage everyone to read Crisis Investing. It was a bestseller for a reason back in the early 80s. Any books you're working on today or recent literature that you can shed light on?
Well, I decided to write novels as an alternative to nonfiction because there are a lot of things that you can say in the form of fiction that you'd best not say in nonfiction. So the first three novels of a series of 7 I'm doing with my friend John Hunt are Speculator, Drug Lord, and Assassin, where our hero progresses through these 3 occupations. And we show that you can be a good guy doing very nasty sounding things. Next, he's accused of being a terrorist, where I get to talk about terrorism as a method of warfare. Then he goes back to Africa, where it starts in Speculator, and he becomes a warlord. And so they're getting more radical as time goes on. So I think people should read them. I think they'll enjoy them, actually.
Okay.
What other book am I writing, actually? I think what we're going to do is a book called The Preparation, which explains exactly what a young man or young woman can do instead of going to college for 4 years, bankrupting themselves, saddling themselves with debt, and being indoctrinated with Marxism for 4 years and basically wasting their time. There are so many things you can do with that time and money where you can get a real education that's of value and not corrupting. So
Actually,
that book.
On that note, that is an interesting point that you brought up. This is I'm going to play you one more clip from Trump, and then we can close off the discussion here. He talked about the education system in one of his clips. Take a listen.
For many years, tuition costs at colleges and universities have been exploding, and I mean absolutely exploding, while academics have been obsessed with indoctrinating America's youth. The time has come to reclaim our once great educational institutions from the radical left, and we will do that. Our secret weapon will be the college accreditation system. It's called accreditation for a reason. The accreditors are supposed to ensure that schools are not ripping off students and taxpayers, but they have failed totally. When I return to the White House, I will fire the radical left accreditors that have allowed our colleges to become dominated by Marxist maniacs and lunatics. We will then accept applications for new accreditors who will impose real standards on colleges once again and once and for all. These standards will include defending the American tradition and Western civilization, protecting free speech, eliminating wasteful administrative positions that drive up costs incredibly, removing all Marxist diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucrats, offering options for accelerated and low-cost degrees, providing meaningful job placement and career services, and implementing college entrance and exit exams to prove that students are actually learning and getting their money's worth. Furthermore, I will direct the Department of Justice to pursue federal civil rights cases against schools that continue to engage in racial discrimination and schools that persist in explicit unlawful discrimination under the guise of equity will not only have their endowments taxed, but through budget reconciliation, I will advance a measure to have them fined up to the entire amount of their endowment.
Okay, that's already a lot to unpack there. I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, yes, the education system may need reform, but on the other hand, do you really want the state to be involved in matters of education? He wants to have accreditors now, and fire any left-leaning accreditors. This may be a slippery slope into state indoctrination.
You're absolutely right, David. I mean, it's not that Trump's heart isn't in the right place, getting rid of the rot in the education system, but the government is the one that put the rot in there to start with and is responsible largely for the high costs by pumping money. Look, it should be a total free market in education, in colleges. Government should be totally disinvolved, uninvolved from anything to do with it. Because if you can put in right-wing, sound thinking accreditors now, the next administration can put in actual communists as accreditors. So this is the wrong solution, quite frankly. It's to get the government out of it, not just change the nature of the government's involvement, which is what Trump's talking about.
How do you propose then we educate the young?
Everybody believes in learning things and education. It's the responsibility of the individual and his family. Do you know that and it's not just the colleges, which are ridiculous. The average cost of educating a grade school student in the U.S. depends on the city, of course, but it's something like $12,000 or $13,000 per student per year. That's insane. I mean, 4 or 5 families could get together and hire an Oxford graduate tutor to school their kids and not have them sit in a room with 30 other kids that are bored out of their minds. There's lots of solutions other than the government doing schooling. Government shouldn't even be involved in grade schools and high schools. Forget about colleges. It's up to the parent and the individual. And the cost could be vastly, vastly lower, and the education much better than it is right now.
Wait, sorry, how would that work if public education is free, is it not?
So, well, it's paid by taxes, mainly real estate taxes in most places. Another distortion that's created, a lot of municipalities, you're paying about 2% of the value of your house per year.
I understand.
It's crazy, and your kids are being miseducated, indoctrinated. So now the government should be out of that, and real estate taxes should go to zero, because actually you don't own your house if you pay real estate taxes. If you don't pay your real estate taxes, you'll find out who really owns your house. So that's yet another distortion in the economy that should be eliminated.
Good point. Doug, thank you very much. We'll put the links to your works down in the description below, so make sure to check out some of the books and, of course, internationalman.com. We'll speak again soon, Doug. Take care.
So it was a pleasure talking to you, David.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.